Afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. I have a Facebook group called the Jazz Vinyl Club, JVC. Anyone who hasn't joined that or seen it, you should. A lot of cool records get posted there every day. Of course, a lot by me, but a lot by the hundreds of people in the group. So check out JVC, the Jazz Vinyl Club. Today, I'm gonna start a little series on the history of my record collection. And I've had some questions about that. Where did it start? How did it all come together? And it's an interesting narrative, and it parallels a lot of my life story. Preacher's kid, born and raised in Canada, moved to the U.S. at 17. Didn't know too much about the U.S. aside for violent football, heavy metal, and some of the people love country. And of course, we moved right away to North Dakota, which had a lot of metal and country. And I was already into a lot of things like Motley Crue back in Canada, Skid Row, that kind of garbage, really. But I was a preacher's kid, you know. That's kind of the way that goes. But we moved to Minneapolis in my metal band in 1991. Me and my brother and two good friends. And we were trying to have our own little successful metal band. And we had gone from collecting cassettes in North Dakota and Canada, kind of behind my parents' back, to be honest, of all the different AC/DC, you know, Guns N' Roses, all those groups. I had hundreds of cassette tapes. And as the CD boom started becoming more and more prominent, you started replacing your titles on the cassette with the CD. And my roommate, of course, had bought a whole bunch of stuff as well. And we had two fairly long shelves of CDs. And for those of you who don't remember when CD technology first came out, things were expensive. In those days, dollars, a lot of CDs were $16.99, $18.99, $22.99. A double CD would be $34.99. It was expensive to buy the wall on CD. It wasn't cheap to go out and collect, you know, old classic rock, heavy metal, whatever on CD. But all the same, we had started to do so. But because CDs were such a kind of new phenomenon and had value at that point, they were something that addicts would steal and pawn. And we lived in South Minneapolis before the gentrification of South Minneapolis. This is back in 1991, maybe early 92. And someone came with an axe and axed down our back door and stole all those CDs. And it was heartbreaking, you know. Sure, the door got broke down, but hey, they didn't get our music gear in the basement, thankfully. But the CDs were what was the toughest part, you know. Screw being robbed. You took our music, and it was very frustrating. Police didn't really give a shit, you know. And so I went down to the local record store called Cheapo, which was a chain of CD, LP stores in the Twin Cities. There was probably 4 or 5 locations at that time. And I went to the Cheapo down the street from me on Lake Street to look for some of my CDs that were stolen. Because I had put a little marker there with a marker on all my discs. Because I knew people would steal their shits. And even it was to keep our CDs separate from our roommates, you know. And I went down there looking, couldn't find none of my discs. And there were CD replacements for $18, $22. I'm like, it's thousands of dollars trying to replace all those CDs. And I walked to the back of the store where the LPs were. And as a metalhead, I had just started branching into classic rock. Sabbath, of course, was linked to Ozzy, so that pushed you back to that part. And then Tesla did that 5-man acoustical jam record where they cover Stones, and they cover Creedence, and they cover a few other bands, 5-man electrical band. And it was so linked to the metal I liked. And I could hear how Aerosmith and AC/DC weren't that far a leap from the Stones. And of course, Led Zeppelin was a huge part of this transition. So I was getting into Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, but then a really huge change point for me was the Beatles. I had a friend who was pretty obsessed with the Beatles, an older fella, he was albino. He sat around with his magnifying glass reading Beatles liner notes, and his name was Jason, good guy. And I'd already kind of been into Come Together and some of the Beatles stuff, but he kind of really introduced me to a lot of it. And it took me a while to get into the earlier Beatles stuff, but I heard a lot of stuff on the White Album, like Your Blues, Happiness is a Warm Gun, Dear Prudence. You can hear that stuff pretty quickly, Across the Universe, Helter Skelter, of course, which is kind of the first metal song in so many ways. And every metal band that's covered it hasn't done it half as raw or as intense as the Beatles did it. And as you get deeper into the Beatles, which I had a love affair with for probably 4 or 5 years, they become this incredible fulcrum. They're this bottleneck in the music history of the last century, where everything before them is in their sound. From blues to R&B to jazz to soul to rock to Elvis, Little Richard. There was everything you can imagine. Rocky Raccoon goes back to the days of, like the vaudeville kind of speakeasy sound. And then they take all that sound from before them, and then over a very short 6-7 year period, all the sound that's after them has some Beatles in it. Revolution 9 predates all industrial noise, sound, and electronic music. Tomorrow Never Knows predates all drum and bass, all electronic, repetitive dance music. If you listen to George Harrison's Within You Without You, all that mystical rock, all that international sound, Harrison brings that into pop music. Eleanor Rigby, strings in pop music. And then Dylan, of course, was the next big chapter, because Dylan brought that consciousness to the music. And of course he did it in the folk genre first, but when he went electric and when he talked to the Beatles and kind of said, with what you guys have potentially as a voice, you should be doing more with it, Dylan and Beatles really kind of changed music and changed my course of what I bought, what I listened to. Behind me is the first stuff I collected, mostly in the 90s. It's, for the most part, going to be classic rock. The first 2 shelves pretty much all are, and it's filled with stuff like the Grateful Dead, mostly complete discographies. Pretty much every Dylan record is in there. The Doors, Cream, Canned Heat, Black Sabbath, David Bowie, Derek and the Dominoes, the Beatles, the Animals, the Beach Boys, the Allman Brothers, Zeppelin, Floyd, Van Morrison, the Moody Blues, Love, the Stones, Springsteen, Simon Garfunkel, Santana, Traffic, Velvet Underground, Springsteen, T-Rex, Tom Waits, The Who, Neil Young, Frank Zappa. All that was big for me. It was all part of my growing up and listening to music beyond Poison. And you can see the links, though, between so many of these generational groups. And it wasn't that far a leap, because they were all kind of based on the blues for the most part. And I was never really into 80s pop music too much until I did a DJ night where I was doing 80s music. And I needed some of that synth pop, new wave stuff to go with my Michael, Billy Ocean, Prince stuff. So I bought that third shelf down there. Is mostly stuff I bought in the late thousands from the new wave. I already had stuff like The Cure and Depeche Mode and Duran Duran, some of that stuff, but I had to really expand that. But on the bottom shelf down there is stuff like Maiden, Priest, all the metal stuff I grew up with as a kid. When I saw it on vinyl, I would start to re-grab that stuff too. And so that kind of sums up what this shelf is. And there's also some industrial stuff down here from Bauhaus, Joy Division, New Order, going into stuff like Skinny Puppy, and Ministry and all those type of acts. So it's a pretty wide range of stuff on this shelf. And one of the big turning points for me was a book I found, The Great Rock Discography by MC Strong. This was a British fella, so it came out in the UK, but it documented fairly extensively British and American rock. You know, it had little few pictures, and it would show 7 inches, the singles, full discography, album-wise, release dates, time, charting positions. So I learned a lot in depth. There's the Beatles right there. And it really started to expand my knowledge. Dead Kennedys, you know, Bauhaus, Taj Mahal, the Stones, Motorhead, 9 Inch Nails. It really covered a fairly wide spectrum of music. There's the Floyd stuff. But it also had stuff like Miles Davis in it and Stevie Wonder. And it was those type of discographies by this book that I have found a lot of validity in, that forced me to branch into jazz and old country and 50s rock and R&B, soul, funk, and of course hip hop. And the Beatles said to me that this is all part of the narrative. Everything before the Beatles, Eddie Cochran, is in the Beatles. Everything since the Beatles has the Beatles in them. So it became all very interwoven for me. And this leads to my next room, which I'm going to show you in the back, is my funk, soul, R&B, hip-hop room. And we'll cover that in the next episode. Appreciate you watching. Subscribe to my channel. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. This is the Toronto St. Pat's, by the way, that's the original name of the Maple Leafs from like the teens. Cool jersey.